Chinese immigrants are not an uncommon sight in America today. But did you know that the first wave of Chinese immigrants came to the United States during the 1849 gold rush? Thousands of Chinese immigrants braved a treacherous journey across the Pacific Ocean to seek their fortunes in California's goldfields. The Chinese immigrants played a pivotal role in shaping the history of the West Coast state, and their contributions are an essential part of the state's cultural fabric. So let's talk about it. What brought these early Chinese immigrants to California? As with most things during this time period, the answer is simple: money. At the time, China was experiencing a great deal of instability. There were floods, famines, civil unrest, and a general lack of opportunity. Many saw the reports of gold in California and decided to take the risk and head out west. The majority of these immigrants came from the Guangdong province in southern China. This area was known for its dense population, poverty, and limited resources. In fact, many scholars believe that overcrowding may have actually been a major catalyst behind the mass migration to California. With so many people in such a small area, competition for resources was fierce. This led many Chinese citizens to seek their fortunes elsewhere, like California. But the journey to the West Coast was long, arduous, and dangerous. Most of the immigrants traveled by ship, which took several months to reach the United States. Conditions were cramped and unsanitary, which led to the spread of disease and the death of many immigrants before they even set foot in America. Those who did survive often found themselves penniless and without work. Despite these hardships, thousands of Chinese continued to come to California in search of a better life. By 1851, approximately 25,000 Chinese had arrived in California. And by the mid-1850s, they made up a significant portion of the mining population. Sometimes they accounted for up to 25% of the miners in California goldfields. Though initially welcomed for their labor, the Chinese immigrants soon faced discrimination and violence. In the 1860s, a nativist backlash against the Chinese began to emerge. This culminated in the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which barred Chinese immigrants from entering the United States and denied citizenship to those already living in the country. Despite these setbacks, the Chinese immigrants persevered. They adapted to the racism and violence they faced and continued to work in the goldfields and build communities in California. During the gold rush, Chinese immigrants were employed in all areas of mining, from prospecting and digging to processing ore. Some even owned and operated their own mines. In addition to their work in mining, the Chinese also played an important role in other industries in California, such as agriculture and transportation. Many worked as farm laborers, while others became merchants or small business owners. Some even worked as domestic servants in the homes of wealthier Californians. Though the Chinese immigrants were an integral part of the workforce in California during the gold rush era, they were often subjected to harsh and dangerous working conditions. In the mines, they were frequently employed in the most dangerous and laborious tasks, such as blasting and tunneling. They were also typically paid less than white miners for the same work. In addition, they faced discrimination in housing, education, and public accommodations. Despite these challenges, the Chinese immigrants continued to work hard and contribute to the growth and development of California. The impact of the Chinese on California during the gold rush era was profound. Their labor helped to build the state's economy and develop its infrastructure. For example, they played a key role in the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad, which connected the eastern and western parts of the United States. In addition, they helped to develop the agricultural industry in California, which would eventually make it one of the most productive agricultural regions in the world. Despite their contributions, however, the Chinese immigrants were often overlooked, and their stories were not widely told until much later. In recent decades, there has been a growing effort to remember and honor the contributions of the Chinese immigrants during the gold rush era. In 1964, the Chinese Historical Society of America was founded to preserve and interpret the history of Chinese Americans. In 1976, the first Chinese American Museum opened in San Francisco, and in 2004, The Smithsonian Institution's Asian Pacific American program hosted the exhibition Gold Mountain, the Chinese in America, to commemorate the 150th anniversary of the first Chinese immigrants arriving in the United States. So now that we've established how the Chinese got to California and some of the difficulties they faced, let's talk about their daily lives. Life for Chinese immigrants in California during the Gold Rush era was a mixture of hard work, perseverance, and community. These immigrants typically lived in small, crowded communities near the gold mines where they worked. They often shared housing with other Chinese immigrants and spoke their native languages. Food was an important part of life for the Chinese immigrants, and they often cooked traditional Chinese dishes using ingredients that they brought with them or grew in small gardens. Despite the hardships they faced, the Chinese immigrants maintained a strong sense of community and supported each other through mutual aid societies. These societies provided financial assistance to members who were ill, injured, or unemployed, and also helped to bury those who died. Religion also played an important role in the lives of many Chinese immigrants, and they often turned to their faith for strength and comfort in times of hardship. Many of them were either Buddhist or Taoist, and they practiced their religions by going to small shrines or temples that were built in the mining towns. The Chinese immigrants in California during the Gold Rush era were a resilient and hardworking group of people who made significant contributions to the state's economy and development. Despite facing discrimination and violence, they persevered and created a lasting impact on California's history. Now, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave us a like and a comment. Tell us what you thought of the video and tell us what other topics you'd like us to cover in future videos. We'd love to hear from you. If you haven't already subscribed, please do. We post new videos every week and you won't want to miss any of them. Also, be sure to check out our website for more information on this and other topics. We have a blog and articles written by experts that you'll find very informative. You can also sign up to receive our newsletter. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Hey, are you tired of the same old boring history lessons? Do you wish there was a more engaging way to learn about the past? Well, look no further, because our mission is to bring history to life for students and the endlessly curious. We believe that history is more than just dates and battles, and that it is full of fascinating stories that can teach us valuable lessons about the world and ourselves. That's why we've created engaging and interactive content that makes learning about the past fun and exciting. Whether you're a student trying to ace that history test or just someone who loves to learn, we've got something for everyone. So why wait? Join the growing number of people who are discovering the joys of learning history. Subscribe to our channel and start exploring the past today. You never know what you might discover. In 1848, the gold rush attracted thousands of hopeful fortune seekers to the newly established California gold fields. The majority of those who answered the call were white Americans, mostly men, many of whom had previously worked in agriculture or were unemployed factory workers from the Northeast seeking better economic opportunities for themselves and their families. These new miners were not the first to arrive in California's gold fields, however. In the years prior to 1848, there was already a small population of Chinese miners working various claims throughout the state. But how did they get there? What were their experiences like? And what impact did they have on California's gold rushes? This is Rogue History. Between 1850 and 1860, approximately 25,000 Chinese immigrants arrived in California, most of whom came from the southern province of Guangdong and were men. While some joined their countrymen who were working in mining, others found work in agriculture, factories, and domestic service. Still, the majority continued to seek their fortunes in the mines. While the traditional narrative suggests that these Chinese immigrants were employed by large mining companies and worked in gangs, this was actually not the case at all. You see, in order to mine in California during this period, one had to own a claim, and the majority of Chinese immigrants were too poor to purchase one. So instead, Chinese miners typically worked claims that had been abandoned by white miners or formed their own groups and cooperatives in which the risk and reward of mining was shared amongst the members. Not only did this allow them to pool their resources, but it also helped to alleviate the harsh realities of working in the mines, such as the backbreaking labor and ever-present threat of injury or death. These mining cooperatives also allowed the Chinese to maintain a sense of community while working in some of the most desolate places imaginable. The use of mining cooperatives was not unique to the Chinese, but when white miners learned that the Chinese were working together, they began to take notice because these cooperative mining ventures were more efficient than the individual claims worked by white miners. To be sure, both methods of mining were used throughout the California gold rush, but due to the organization inherent to Chinese mining cooperatives, they proved to be more successful. Not only were they able to find and extract more gold, but their operations were more cost-effective and profitable. White miners recognized this and so sought to learn the secrets of the Chinese mining cooperatives, which further led to increased competition for the most lucrative mining locations. In general, Chinese miners were highly unlikely to own more than a few acres of land and were rarely able to acquire a full mining title. As a result, they tended to pan for gold along riverbanks and in streams or utilized the hydraulic mining technique known as placer mining. Placer mining involved using water to wash away the dirt and rock in search of gold. Miners would typically build a sluice, a trough-like structure with riffles that would cause the water to flow slowly enough to allow gold to settle out before being collected. Chinese miners typically used picks, shovels, and pans to move the dirt and rock, but often employed other tools that had been brought with them from China, such as the long-handled bamboo basket. In addition to being more cost-effective and profitable, Chinese miners were also more environmentally friendly than their white counterparts. Unlike the typical white miner who carved out a living by digging deep shafts and tunnels into hillsides, Chinese miners were more likely to work on the surface, or at least closer to it. Their methods of extracting gold did not require them to cut into the landscape in the same way that other mining operations did. For this reason, Chinese miners were less likely to cause landslides or divert the courses of streams, rivers, and creeks, all of which were common problems caused by white mining operations. Despite this, Chinese mining was still considered more destructive than white mining because it left unsightly piles of tailings behind. Tailings were the waste material left over after the dirt and rock had been sifted through the sluice. Since Chinese miners could not effectively use the land after they had finished mining, they were forced to abandon their claims and move to new locations. This was not necessarily a bad thing, however, since it allowed them to travel and work in different areas where they could continue finding gold. Because of their cooperation, profitability, and environmental awareness, Chinese miners were often employed by large mining companies to help them improve their overall efficiency. At times, they even assisted white miners in purchasing supplies or managing their businesses while they went to the mines. But despite their usefulness to mining companies, Chinese miners were still subjected to a foreign miner tax, which required them to pay an additional fee for the right to mine on public lands. This tax was first enacted in 1852 and was repealed in 1902, meaning that Chinese miners paid this fee for nearly 50 years without any say in its collection or purpose. The money collected from this tax was supposed to go towards schools and infrastructure projects, but it was often diverted to local jails, which were used to house Chinese miners who were arrested for minor offenses or no offenses at all. Between 1852 and 1862, for instance, nearly 1,000 Chinese were arrested in San Francisco on charges of illegal mining and sent to work in mines or as laborers. As the demand for gold increased and the price of mining escalated, the relationship between Chinese and white miners became increasingly strained. With so much at stake, tensions rose, leading to violent clashes between the two groups. These conflicts were sometimes the result of competition for limited resources or the result of white miners' attempts to collect the foreign miners' tax. Other times, they were the result of nothing more than pure racism. The majority of attacks against Chinese miners were committed by white mobs or private vigilante groups who targeted Chinese miners at random. They would destroy their property, beat them, then run them out of town. And unfortunately, law enforcement officers were often complicit in these attacks, either participating alongside the mobs or failing to intervene when they could have. In 1876, a group of white miners attacked a Chinese mining cooperative in the Sierra Nevada foothills, killing 6 of the 8 Chinese miners and burning their cabins to the ground. The attackers stole an undetermined amount of gold and supplies and destroyed the mining operation. Local law enforcement failed to apprehend any of the attackers and refused to return the stolen property to the families of the victims. After exhausting all of their legal options, the Chinese families were offered $5,000 each to settle the case. The offer was refused. So the following year, the families received not even an apology, much less justice. While Chinese miners were regularly denied the right to own land and were subjected to unfair taxes, they were also prevented from joining labor unions, which further limited their ability to advocate for their rights or even organize for mutual support. When the white miners went on strike in 1866, Chinese miners were expected to continue working under the same dangerous conditions and for the same low wages. They were also forced to remain quiet as their white counterparts negotiated contracts with mining companies. By remaining silent, Chinese miners agreed to forego any increase in wages and to accept whatever terms the company set forth. This lack of representation also meant that Chinese miners were not eligible for compensation when they were injured on the job or in accidents. In many cases, mining companies simply hired Chinese miners knowing that they would work for less and with fewer rights. Today, very little remains of the Chinese mining communities from the mid-1800s, yet their contributions are undeniable. It is estimated that Chinese miners produced at least 3% of all the gold mined in California during the gold rush. They adapted quickly to the use of new technologies and were early adopters of the metal detector, which allowed them to find gold more efficiently than ever before. They also built the first railroads in California and helped to open up the western United States to mining operations of unprecedented scale. But despite all of this, the legacy of the Chinese miner has been all but forgotten. Their stories have been erased from history books and replaced with a false narrative that does not do justice to the hardships they endured, nor does it reflect their tremendous impact on the California gold rush. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Rogue History. If you did, please feel free to leave a like and a comment. And if you want to support the channel, consider becoming a member. Your support helps to keep the channel running and allows me to continue telling these important stories. Thank you so much for watching. I'm here to tell you the story of how the Chinese created an opium problem in America. But before we get into it, let me know in the comments below what stereotypes do you think existed about the Chinese immigrants coming over to America. And if you like stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. In the mid-19th century, two massive waves of immigration occurred in the United States. Between 1842 and 1870, 300,000 Chinese immigrants arrived in America, most of them men. And the majority of these new arrivals were young, single men who worked as miners or in manual labor. The gold rush had begun 8 years earlier in 1848 when gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill near Sacramento, causing an immediate population explosion in California as thousands of fortune seekers descended upon the region hoping to strike it rich. By 1852, San Francisco's population had grown from 1,000 to 25,000 people in just 2 years. That same year, an estimated 25,000 Chinese immigrants lived in California. But while the Chinese were a key part of the gold rush boom and bust, they seldom achieved the kind of wealth that allowed them to leave mining and work towards home. They endured dangerous working conditions and constant exploitation by their white American counterparts. And while many Chinese did discover veins of gold and amass fortunes, they were the exception, not the rule. As the gold rush faded, many Chinese found themselves out of work and searching for other opportunities. This led them to another project that would help shape America, the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. This project would connect the eastern United States with the Pacific coast and was seen as a monumental undertaking. President Abraham Lincoln recognized the importance of the railroad, believing it would bring the nation together and help bind the states together after the Civil War. Once completed, goods could travel across the country in less than 2 weeks. Before the railroad, this journey took months. With the discovery of gold and the creation of the railroad, two distinct Chinatowns emerged in California. One was located in the gold mining regions of the Mother Lode, where small communities sprang up to house the mostly male Chinese workforce. The other was in San Francisco, where the majority of Chinese immigrants gravitated toward after the collapse of the gold rush. Here they built an entire community with shops and businesses catering to the needs of its Chinese residents. These two communities grew to become the epicenters of Chinese culture in America. And San Francisco's Chinatown remains the oldest and largest in the Western Hemisphere today. Life in these Chinatowns was not easy. Many Chinese immigrants toiled long hours for low wages under dangerous conditions. The language barrier prevented them from effectively communicating with the people around them. They also carried with them a different culture, customs, and traditions that were often misunderstood or ridiculed by Americans. Because of this, many Chinese sought solace in familiar traditions and customs, including the habit of opium smoking. Opium dens became popular in these communities around 1850, providing a place where Chinese immigrants could relax and escape the loneliness and discrimination they faced in a foreign land. In the United States, opium smoking was not as widespread as it was in China, but the practice was still deeply ingrained in Chinese culture and was seen as a way to alleviate pain and suffering. Back in China, opium smoking had been used for centuries to treat pain and illness. It was also used in religious ceremonies and was seen as a way to help people cope with the hardships of life. In fact, the Chinese had been cultivating and using opium poppies since 2700 BC. They believed that opium could relieve pain and suffering and was a gift from the gods. When the Chinese began arriving in San Francisco in large numbers during the gold rush, they brought with them the habit of opium smoking. They set up opium dens, which were rooms or buildings where opium was smoked, often hidden away in the city's underbelly. These dens became popular gathering spots for the Chinese immigrants where they could smoke opium, play games, and socialize with other Chinese. The opium was typically smoked in pipes made of metal or wood, and the smoke was inhaled to produce a feeling of euphoria and relaxation. Some of the immigrants saw opium smoking as a way to escape the harsh realities of their lives in America. They were exploited and abused and faced discrimination and prejudice on a daily basis. Opium smoking offered a temporary reprieve from the struggles they endured. In addition, opium smoking was seen as a way to maintain a sense of Chinese identity and culture in a rapidly changing and often hostile environment. For the Chinese immigrants, opium dens provided a sense of community and belonging, allowing them to connect with other Chinese immigrants and share their experiences and stories. The dens also offered a place to escape the loneliness and isolation that many Chinese immigrants felt. Living and working conditions were often cramped and unsanitary, and many Chinese immigrants were isolated from the rest of society. Opium dens provided a place where they could feel comfortable and relaxed. However, opium smoking and the dens in which they occurred did not only attract the Chinese. As more and more Chinese immigrants arrived in San Francisco and other American cities, the number of opium dens grew. And while the Chinese generally kept to themselves, playing games, socializing, and smoking opium, the dens became a point of curiosity for non-Chinese Americans. Many white Americans were fascinated by the mysterious ways of the Chinese, and the opium dens offered a chance to see a different way of life. Additionally, the presence of opium dens in Chinese neighborhoods was seen by some as a threat to the safety and well-being of the community. There were concerns that opium smoking was leading to crime and violence, and that the dens were breeding grounds for criminal activity. This fear was fueled by sensationalist media reports and stereotypes about the Chinese that portrayed them as inherently criminal or dangerous. Whatever the reasons, non-Chinese began to frequent the opium dens, and some even began smoking opium themselves. It wasn't long before the opium dens became a hub for all sorts of people, not just Chinese immigrants. This led to a backlash against the dens and calls for their closure. Many white Americans viewed the opium dens as a menace to society and blamed the Chinese immigrants for bringing opium and this dangerous habit to America. They argued that the dens were causing crime and addiction, and that the Chinese were a threat to the morals and values of American society. By the late 1800s, the anti-Chinese movement gained momentum and the Chinese were blamed for bringing opium to America and corrupting its youth. The reality was that opium had been used in America long before the Chinese arrived. However, the arrival of the Chinese and the establishment of opium dens in their communities made opium more visible and accessible to non-Chinese Americans. And so the outcry to ban opium dens reached a fever pitch. In 1875, the first anti-opium law was passed in San Francisco. This was followed by similar laws in other cities across the country. The laws made the possession and use of opium illegal and the sale and distribution of opium was banned. The police were given the power to raid opium dens and arrest those involved in the trade. These laws were the first of their kind in the United States, and they had a significant impact on the Chinese community. The raids and arrests of Chinese immigrants in connection with opium use and sales disrupted the social fabric of the Chinese communities. Many Chinese immigrants were forced to abandon their opium habits and hide their dens. And others were arrested and jailed or deported back to China. These laws also contributed to the growing anti-Chinese sentiment in America. The Chinese were seen as a threat to the country's moral fabric, and the laws were seen as a way to protect American society from the dangers of opium. However, the laws were also seen as a way to discriminate against and persecute the Chinese. The Chinese were blamed for bringing opium to America, and they were targeted for their supposed opium dens and opium addiction. In the end, the anti-opium laws were a major factor in the decline of opium smoking among the Chinese in America. The laws made it too dangerous and difficult to buy and sell opium, and this led to a decrease in the number of opium dens. By the turn of the century, the Chinese had been systematically excluded from most aspects of American life. They were denied citizenship and were subjected to discriminatory laws and practices. Despite these challenges, the Chinese continued to contribute to the development and growth of California and the United States as a whole. Their labor helped build the railroads and other infrastructure that connected the country, and their businesses and cultural institutions helped enrich the cultural fabric of American society. While their contributions are often overlooked, the Chinese have played a vital role in shaping the history of California and the United States. The legacy of Chinese immigrants during the gold rush and railroad construction is a testament to their hard work, resilience, and contributions to the region's development. Despite facing systemic exclusion and racism, they persevered and created a lasting impact on California's early multicultural society. Their presence also helped drive economic development in the region and introduce cultural elements such as opium smoking to America during that era. Understanding their contributions and experiences is essential to understanding the rich history of California and the United States. Alright, guys, that's it for tonight's episode. Let me know in the comments below what you thought about how the Chinese created an opium problem in America. If you liked this episode, be sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks for watching.